All of the Strand Fragments just unlocked, meaning we now have access to the full potential of Strand, and let me tell you, Strand Warlock is absolutely incredible. With the new fragments and new Warlock exotic legs, we can create one of the strongest builds I have seen in Destiny in a long time. There are a lot of moving pieces to this build, but we're going to break it all down and get you set up with what I believe to be one of the most powerful builds in Lightfall. My name is Gray. If you guys enjoyed the video, a like and sub is massively appreciated. Now let's get into it. Ever since we got our hands on the new Strand subclass, I've been waiting to put together the ultimate Warlock Threadling build. There are so many interwoven layers to this build between the subclass, exotics, and artifact perks, so it's going to be important to understand everything that's going on here. Starting with the Broodweaver subclass, we have the Needle Storm Super. This burst super fires a barrage of strand needles that deal damage, and then transform into Threadlings that deal additional damage. If a Threadling is unable to find a target, it will return to you and perch. You can have up to 5 perched Threadlings at a time, and they will automatically seek out enemies whenever you fire your weapon. They deal great damage, especially when paired with the Thread of Evolution fragment, which makes them travel further and deal additional damage. Our melee is Arcane Needle, which has 3 charges by default, and this melee will unravel any enemies that it hits. The unravel mechanic is important to understand, as anytime we defeat an unraveled target, they will create a Strand Tangle. Strand Tangles are the green orbs that spawn that you can shoot to explode or pick up and throw at nearby enemies. We have dozens of ways of unraveling enemies, meaning we will create these Strand Tangles constantly. Our grenade of choice will be the Threadling Grenade. This creates 3 Threadlings whenever we use our grenade. Again, if they don't find targets, they return to you and perch. Our first aspect is Weaver's Call. When we cast our Rift, it will create 3 Threadlings and deploy all of our currently perched Threadlings as well. Our second aspect is Mindspun Invocation. This allows us to consume our Threadling Grenade and immediately generate 5 perched Threadlings. You can honestly choose to throw your grenade like normal or consume it with this aspect depending on the situation. For a boss DPS situation, I like to consume my grenade first, drop my Rift to deploy all 5 Threadlings, and then immediately follow up with the super to generate a ton of Threadling explosions for huge damage. Our first fragment is of course Thread of Evolution, which buffs our Threadlings, and our second fragment is Thread of Generation. Dealing damage of any kind generates grenade energy. This fragment is ridiculous. You literally generate free grenade energy just for playing the game and dealing damage to any enemy in any way. Next, we will take Thread of Warding. This grants us the Woven Mail buff for 10 seconds whenever we pick up an Orb of Power. Woven Mail grants damage resistance, and I believe it's around a 50% damage reduction, which is pretty insane. Finally, we'll take Thread of Transmutation. While we have Woven Mail active, any weapon final blow will create a Tangle. These Tangles are essential to the rest of the build, which begins with the new Warlock exotic legs, the Swarmers. This exotic makes it so destroying a Tangle spawns a Threadling, and now all of our Threadlings will unravel targets that they damage, which in turn leads to creating even more Tangles. This subclass and exotic combo is already packed with synergy, but our seasonal artifact perks are what take this build from powerful to downright broken. We'll start off by taking Authorized Mods Strand and Authorized Mods Grenades. This is really important since it will reduce the cost of all of our strand and grenade mods on our armor. Next, you will take Untangler. This makes it so when we destroy a Tangle with a strand weapon by shooting it, it will suspend all the enemies that are caught in its blast. It's an incredible passive addition to the build. You'll then take Allied Unraveling, which grants our strand weapons unraveling rounds from rapid final blows. This again will make enemies that we defeat spawn a Tangle if they are unraveled. And the final cherry on top is Threaded Blast. Destroying a Tangle with a strand weapon creates a larger and more damaging explosion. This is literally pre-nerf Warmind Cell levels of explosion. It's absolutely massive and deals incredible damage. So not only does destroying a Tangle nuke the entire area, but it will also spawn Threadlings thanks to our exotic legs. Now before we dive into armor mods, I want to talk about the weapons that you can pair with this build as well. The Quicksilver Storm exotic auto rifle is an amazing pairing if you've completed the Catalyst. The Catalyst changes the weapon to deal strand damage and makes it so the alternate grenade launcher firing mode creates even more Tangles on final blows, which means even more Threadlings. Keep in mind, this weapon is currently bugged. It is dealing 40% less damage to miners than it should be. Bungie has acknowledged this and it should be fixed soon, and it's still a great weapon regardless. I'm pairing this with the new Strand Machine Gun Circular Logic, which can roll with the perk hatchling. Precision final blows or rapidly defeating targets spawns a Threadling at the target's location. This is yet another way of creating Threadlings, keeping in mind they all lead to unraveling enemies, creating tangles, and commanding an army of Threadlings. The Synchronic Roulette is an alternative to Quicksilver Storm, and it can roll with the hatchling perk as well if you prefer an SMG. Now moving on to our armor mods, feel free to screenshot the build here for reference and use the dim loadout link below to instantly set this up on your character. I do recommend 100 resilience and 100 discipline to have our Threadling grenade as often as possible. On our helmet, we take 2 copies of Ashes to Assets, and the Threadlings that spawn specifically from our grenade will count as grenade final blows and activate this mod. I am also taking the dual Void/Strand Siphon mod to create orbs of power from Strand and Void weapon final blows. For our arms, we take 1 copy of Firepower, which will allow our Threadlings from our grenade to generate an orb of power when they defeat a target. We then take 2 copies of Grenade Kickstart, which will help us refund our grenade quickly. On our chest, we take Charged Up, which raises our armor charge cap to 4 up from 3, and any resist mods that you find helpful. For our legs, we take Stacks on Stacks to get 2 armor charges every time we pick up a single orb, and 2 copies of Innervation, which instantly grants grenade energy on orb pickup. Finally, on our class item, you can take up to 3 copies of Bomber, which reduces grenade cooldown when we drop our Rift near enemies. This works really well with this build, as we can use our Rift to deploy our Threadlings and simultaneously refund a huge amount of grenade energy at the same time. There are so many layers to Strand. We are constantly unraveling enemies, creating tangles, causing massive AoE explosions when we shoot them, and commanding an army of Threadlings along an incredibly high damage super. This build is the full package. It's so strong that I anticipate some of these fragments being disabled for the day 1 raid, but if they aren't, this could be a serious contender. Reminder to use the dim loadout link to set this all up for yourself, and feel free to ask any questions down below, as Strand is extremely complicated. But I promise you, the more that you play with it, the more it will make sense. If you guys enjoyed the video, a like and sub is massively appreciated. I really hope you enjoy this build as much as I do. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next one.